In a far-off land, nestled between mountains and dense forests, lived a woodcutter named Hans. He was known throughout the village for his skill in cutting down trees and for bringing back the best timber from the nearby forests. Hans had a wife and 2 young sons, whom he loved dearly, and they all lived in a small wooden hut at the edge of the forest. One day, Hans heard rumors of a mountain deep in the forest that had the most valuable and clean wood. He really wanted to find this special wood, even though his wife told him it was very dangerous. Despite her warning, Hans decided to go into the forest and find this mountain. "Please, Hans, don't go to that mountain," begged his wife. "There are stories of strange creatures living there, and it's not worth risking our lives for a few logs of wood." But Hans was stubborn and ignored his wife's warnings. He packed his tools and set off for the mountain, determined to bring back the best timber to support his family. As he approached the mountain, he noticed a large old tree that stood out from the rest. It was a tall, sturdy tree with gnarled branches and thick bark. Hans knew that this tree would fetch a high price in the market, so he began to chop it down. As he swung his axe, he heard a strange rustling noise coming from within the tree, but he ignored it, thinking it was just the wind blowing through the branches. After a few more swings, the tree came crashing down, and Hans noticed something unusual inside. There were little people, no taller than 2 inches, scurrying about inside the tree. Hans was startled but thought they were harmless and went about his work. Little did he know, those tiny people were fiercely protective of their home. Hans loaded the timber onto his cart and began the long journey home. Not knowing, the little people had followed him down the mountain and were waiting for their chance to take revenge. The night was peaceful, and the woodcutter's family slept soundly after a long day. Hans, tired from his journey, slept deeply, unaware of the impending danger. But as the night wore on, the little people crept into the hut, their tiny feet making almost no sound. They approached the sleeping family and began to devour the 2 young sons, leaving only mangled remains. As the sun rose the next morning, Hans awoke to a terrible sight. His 2 sons were missing, and in their place were pieces of flesh, bones, and tiny footprints. The realization of what had happened hit him like a ton of bricks. The little people he had encountered on the mountain were the culprits. Fueled by anger and grief, the woodcutter knew he had to take action. He couldn't let these tiny creatures go unpunished for their gruesome act. Without delay, he set out on the dangerous journey to the mountain. His heart was heavy with the loss of his sons, but he was determined to find the little people and make them pay. As he wandered through the forest, he searched for any sign of the little people's presence. Finally, after hours of searching, he heard faint voices coming from a nearby tree. The woodcutter crept closer to the tree, trying to get a better sense of what was happening. He heard the tiny people's voices more clearly, and he knew for sure that they were inside. Without hesitation, the woodcutter gathered as much dry wood as he could find and piled it around the base of the tree. He lit the wood, and soon the flames were licking at the trunk of the tree. The little people inside began to scream and plead for mercy, but Hans didn't relent. The woodcutter watched as the tree burned to the ground, taking the tiny creatures with it. He felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart, knowing that he had avenged his sons' deaths. As he walked back to his hut, he felt a strange sense of emptiness. He knew that nothing could bring his sons back, and he was consumed with grief, but he also knew that he had done the right thing, and he took some solace in that. From that day on, the woodcutter became a loner. He spent most of his days alone, haunted by the memories of his sons and the little people he had burned alive. He knew that nothing could bring his sons back, and he was consumed with grief. As time passed, the memory of the little people began to fade, and the forest returned to its natural state. The woodcutter never forgot what had happened, but he learned to live with the pain. Years later, as he sat alone in his hut with his wife by his side, he heard the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. It reminded him of the sound of the little people's tiny feet, and he felt a pang of sadness. But then he heard something else, the sound of children laughing and playing. It was the sound of life, of innocence, and of hope. And in that moment, the woodcutter knew that there was still good in the world, and that even in the darkest of times, there was always a glimmer of light.